Welcome back to Milan Recording Studios. My name is James Pavloshakras, and as you can see, there's something different. There's something very important missing that's always featured in my videos, and that is the leather jacket. This is the first video that I'm doing here at the studio that's kind of a more casual video. I didn't bother putting on my outfit because, unlike many people believe, and I can understand why they believe it, I do not live 24/7 in a leather jacket. But this is a casual type of video that I wanted to do. It's behind the scenes content that a lot of people have asked for. And it's not the behind the scenes content you'd expect, but it's still behind the scenes content. So I hope you guys enjoy it. What this weird little cube is here in front of me is a Hammond line voltage regulator. And I'll talk more about this later on in the video about who made it and what it does, but long story short is it's not related to Hammond organs, and essentially it's able to change the output voltage. Here in the United States, 120 volts comes out of the wall, but for certain types of equipment, most notably vintage tube equipment, 120 volts isn't what they were originally meant for, so lowering that voltage down just a little bit is reported to increase their lifespan, and that is always a good idea. Tube equipment, vintage tube equipment, most of it's very expensive, and so you don't want it to fail early. So this will hopefully help us to increase the lifespan of our tube-powered equipment, of which we have lots. However, this is going to need some work because the end of the power cable, I'll show you this in a bit, the end of the power cable is just going 6 different directions. The inside of it is probably going to be nasty because the outside of it was nasty, and I've cleaned that off. It was dusty and gross. So the inside of it's probably going to be nasty, and we have to fix the power cable. So let's dive into that and do a quick basic restoration. I don't think much else will be wrong with it, and then we'll test it out and see if it works. Let's dive into it and get this top off of here. So here's a closer look at the front panel of this Hammond line voltage regulator, and you can just kind of tell just by looking at it that it's old. It has this kind of a vintage, like a 50s kind of look. These type of metal badges were often used, and still are used today, but were very often used back in the 50s and 60s. So this is, as I said, a line voltage regulator, and at first it may seem to be very similar to a piece of equipment that a lot of electronics repair people use, and that is known as a variac. Now, there's a couple of main differences between this piece of equipment and a variac, although they do both do similar things. A lot of variacs, although I'm not an expert in this field, I do know that a lot of variacs can take the power output all the way down to around 40 volts, and this cannot do that. This can realistically run a power output of around 109 volts all the way up to 150 should you need that for whatever reason. But there's another advantage to this over a variac for us, and that is that this is not only made for testing. Variac is really only made for testing, and it's not really meant to run for long periods of time. But this is. This is meant to lower or raise the voltage of a piece of equipment for a sustained period of time, which is exactly what we would need. So this is going to be very, very helpful for helping to protect our vintage equipment. A lot of people say that vintage equipment should be run somewhere around 117 volts because that's what it originally was meant to be run at. And today, since this equipment has aged, a lot of people believe that it shouldn't even be run that high. It should be ran at about 115 or 112 or even 110 volts. So this piece of equipment hopefully will help preserve our vintage equipment that uses tubes and will help prolong the longevity of these awesome instruments. So that I think is really cool, but what's even more interesting is the stuff that's going on inside of here. It's really odd. So let's take an even closer look and check out the inside of this thing. So although I'm not an expert at electronics, I thought it still would be really cool to show you guys the inside of this and just give you a brief look at what it looks like. And you can see that there's 3 major components that we have here. The one I like the most, actually there's a couple, but this one is the back end of the large dial you saw on the front. And another thing that separates this from a traditional repairman's variac is that this is not a smooth dial. It's actually, for the lack of better terms, ratcheted. So when I turn it, you can see that it has different click positions that it will set into, and each one of those will raise or lower, if you go in the opposite direction, the voltage by just a couple of volts each click. So that is really interesting, and that's another thing that separates this from a traditional variac. So that's your big knob here, and you can see the mechanics of how it moves, which is really cool. So that I think alone was just worth taking off the top and showing you. And then this over here is the back end of the dial, the VU meter for the lack of better terms, that's on the other side. So this is the back end of that. And then this here is, well, again, for the lack of better terms, it's a giant transformer. It's really huge. You can see that it's really, really heavy duty. And probably the most obvious thing is that it's really dusty. This was obviously kept in some kind of a repair shop for many, many years, probably like a, you know, a converted garage or something like that. So it's got all kinds of dust in here, and we were going to do our best to basically clean that out and get that out, because why not? But that's just a quick look at the inside of this, and hopefully you guys liked that. So we've cleaned the inside of the Hammond line voltage regulator, just, you know, a preliminary clean of dust and grime, and as you can see, it looks way better. Without the cleaning, it looked like it was in terrible shape, but now that we've cleaned it up, we can actually see that it is in actually quite good condition, especially considering how old it is. It's actually, under the surface, very, very clean and appears to be in very nice condition. It just had some dust and some oil and grease and grime all over the wires and the bottom panel here, so we've cleaned all that off. And it actually looks really nice now. So now that it's all clean, I think it's time to move on to looking at some other things about it. So this is our new end, which I think is a significant improvement. Now it actually looks like a normal power cable. The fix was relatively simple, so I didn't cover it on camera, but basically we just cut the old end off. This is what that looked like, again, for reference. Just cut that off, restripped the wires, and inserted them into this end and assembled this part. So that was honestly very simple, and now I think it's time for a moment of truth to plug this in and show you guys how it works. So now I have the Hammond line voltage regulator all put back together. We have the top back on it, and it looks the way it should. So now we have two questions to answer in today's video. One, does this work? And number two, how do we make sure it is working properly? So, and I have the answers to both of those questions, and we will find them out here in a second. So the answer to question number one, does it work? Well, I'm predicting it will, because electronic equipment from this time, although it may look old and dusty and sketchy on the inside, is actually very reliable. And typically you won't have a piece of equipment like this just wink out and not work. Sometimes a component will fail and it won't work properly, but usually it'll give you some indication of that it's working. So let's have the moment of truth and flip this switch, which was very satisfying. And you can see that this is coming on, and this. Now, what is this? Third question of the video. This is a Furman power conditioner, and it's a very handy piece of equipment that I honestly recommend. It can be affordable. This one we bought used on eBay for about $80. Brand new, they're about $400, which isn't terribly expensive in the world of musical equipment. And it doesn't even have to be used only with musical equipment too. It can be used with all kinds of different things. And essentially what it's doing is it's showing you how much voltage it's receiving. So if you plug it into a bad power outlet and it's shooting off of the charts, you'll know not to plug anything else into there, because it'll tell you how much voltage it's receiving. And as you can see right now, it's only receiving 110 volts. That's because that's the minimum amount of voltage that this line voltage regulator can output. Like I said earlier in the video, it can't go down as low as a proper Variac can, but this still will be very useful for us with vintage equipment. Now this dial here will, when I turn this, you'll notice that both this gauge goes up and the LED clicks up. Let me do that again. And you'll see that once again, the LEDs go up and so does this. So if I keep increasing that, you'll see that we'll be approaching 120, we'll go past it, and then we'll go further a little bit. So this is our answer to, is it working properly? And clearly it is working properly. This is our true way of testing it. If I increase it again, you'll see it goes up a little bit past 120. It doesn't stick perfectly at 120. It's a little bit below and a little bit over. If I go one more click, you'll see that now we're into the red. And I'm not going to push it any farther because that's probably bad. But you can see that it definitely can go well over 120 as well. And so that definitely is showing us that the Hammond line voltage regulator is working as it should. So I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this little video here of the Hammond line voltage regulator. I think it's going to be really helpful for running vintage tube equipment and postponing the date of when it may fail. We haven't had anything fail yet, but I suppose you could say that day is inevitable. But if you're running it around 110, as many people say you should with tube equipment, there we go. That day will be postponed. So I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this video of this this vintage Hammond line voltage regulator. Once again, the outside just looks older than it is. This is sort of behind the scenes content at the studio, and I've had a lot of people ask for behind the scenes content at Milan Recording Studios. And obviously this is not the type of content you would expect to see from a recording studio. You'd expect to see, you know, the behind the scenes of the mic placement and the setup, you know, kind of like what the vlogs Adam Neely does before he goes to his gigs. You'd expect that kind of stuff, except in the studio. However, there's also a lot of other things, a lot of somewhat more mundane, but also interesting things like this line voltage regulator that we'll use to help out our vintage equipment. So I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, but before I go, I wanted to give myself a little bit of a shameless self-promotion. This was a quick little video that I basically slapped together just for some fun, but I have a more in-depth video that I've been working on basically for around 6 months. And I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about what's coming in that, because I think it's going to be actually super exciting, and the type of content you'd expect from a studio. So as many of you guys know, I've done lots of on-location recording, and for those on-location recordings, historically I've used battery-powered equipment. I've gotten very good results with it, but as you know, recently at Milan Recording Studios, I've been experimenting with using truly high-end microphones and relative, not advanced, but very important microphone placement techniques to get really high-quality recordings of my pianos. However, at the moment, that setup is limited to only the studio. But right now, I'm working on a really, really fascinating setup of equipment. This stand, this, I don't know what to call it, this arrangement of equipment that will help me to record with that high fidelity of Neumann U87s on location. So it's going to be absolutely amazing, and in the future I'm going to be hopefully having the opportunity to record some truly phenomenal artists of all different types, not just piano, all different types of musicians. Hopefully I'll be able to be recording them in all sorts of locations. Some of them may come to the studio and others may be on location, and for those you'll be seeing this new mobile recording studio. So that's what this upcoming video is going to be about. It's going to be coming out within a few weeks to a month. I'm still working on getting all the proper cables. I'm still waiting on a couple of little pieces of equipment to come in for it. And once we get it set up and we get it fine-tuned, I'll be making a video about that. And it's going to be amazing. I think it's truly going to be phenomenal. It's got some rare equipment, some expensive, some fancy equipment, some really cool stuff. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. So if you're new to Milan Recording Studios and you've made it all the way to the end of this video, you might want to think about subscribing, because I think that video is really going to be amazing. With that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.